In a world where controversy, drama, and extremism is seemingly prioritized over rational thoughts and discussions, Starfield is consistently finding its way to be at the center of all of that. How is it going, everybody? My name is Damarco, and I have some fun Starfield discussions for all of you. Of course, some drama, because when is there not? But we're going to dispel our way through that. But if you are new here and you like RPGs and Bethesda games, consider sticking around and subscribing for more. We got The Elder Scrolls 6, The Witcher 4, and so much more. Yes, that was planned to rhyme well in advance. But I hope that some of you guys enjoy the content too, want to stick around for more and enjoy hanging out here. But let's get into our first story here today, which is not necessarily a review bombing, although we do know that that took place for Starfield. However, it is now official that Starfield is the lowest rated Bethesda game of all time over on Steam. When this article was written, it was sitting at 71.72 versus Fallout 76, which was 71.76. Now, if you look at more up-to-date data using SteamDB, where this information was taken from, it is actually sitting at a 71.40, so slightly lower. And if we want to throw a little bit of dirt on the wound here, we can actually see that 2 weeks ago, when this article was written, published by Ed Smith, it was actually at a 77, so it has dropped off a decent amount in the past 2 weeks. So obviously at the heart of this discussion is the fact that most of us, anybody with a pair of eyes, can see that this isn't warranted, it's not quite frankly deserved, and of course there were the review bombings that did take place, unreasonably so, for Starfield. And where I want to really pivot this discussion is less so on the drama behind it, but more as to why this can be a problem in a couple years or further down the line for a lot of user review scores who have legitimate, valid opinions that want to see the best for the game. To take away some of the drama side of it, if we do look at Steam's official reviews for Starfield, you will notice that it's still sitting at a mostly positive. This is what users are greeted with when they do visit Starfield's page. It's mostly positive. You can see if you hover over it that it is 75% positive, but when you click on the actual reviews and dive deeper, there is a reasonable balance of thumbs up to thumbs down, which of course there is a discussion to be had as to whether or not that simple system, good, bad, is worthwhile. I personally think it does have its values, although I know plenty of arguments why some people might disagree with that. But for the most part, the reviews that are negative are coming from reasonable sources. This for example, has had 265 hours in the game. Here it's 53. If we look at a couple negative ones, 24, 75, 137. That's not to say some people with less play time, if you want to use that as the ultimate metric of whether or not a player has a valid opinion on the game, some of those have slipped through. And if you do dig deeper and really dive in, you will find folks who have played it for under an hour. You'll find folks who have played it for 3 hours. We've proven that there's some folks out there who are putting their thoughts who literally have not played the game whatsoever.
Do you think that was the choices you made? What is her name? Lynn or Lim, the lady who's your boss? Do you think part of it is just the fact that she asked you to burn the bodies and it should be more of a choice versus she forces you to do it and it's almost like it's scripted at that point?
That's some of it.
I mean, that didn't happen at all in the game, so I'm assuming you haven't played it yet, correct?
The reality is Bethesda sees through this, we see through this, and we know to more or less ignore it. But the major concern I have is how seriously user reviews are taken from studios, from developers, from publishers. If this tool that we have, if you want to even call it that, of review bombing, becomes so monumentally diluted that anytime you want to cause controversy around a major release, you resort to review bombing, as a publisher, I would start to look a lot more introspectively. I would start to look at more hard data. What are players doing in the game? What percentage of players are interacting with what elements? And that's how I would base my decision off of. Not that studios don't already do that, but I would more or less start to discredit more and more the user review score side of things when I know that it's just filled with a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of people who are trying to get the game penalized throughout various platforms, so on and so forth. There are certain instances where I think review bombing is warranted. You look at something like Star Wars Battlefront 2 from EA, which pushed microtransactions to the absolute extreme. That deserves to have negative reviews on the game, and publishers should be aware. And of course, that led to much more extreme action over time, where Disney themselves actually got involved with EA and said, hey, what are you guys doing over here? There's plenty of other examples that are very similar to this in nature, but if you are taking part in or actively trying to promote the act of review bombing because it is coming from a console war fanboyism standpoint or otherwise, that's just the most common example that it seems to be as of late, as console exclusivity becomes more of a divisive issue. Then when you do have a valid opinion, when you do have something that you want to be heard, don't be surprised when it gets taken less and less seriously. And over the long term, this is one of my major concerns, that publishers and developers will start to look less at player feedback, more at just hard data, hard numbers, which of course we know doesn't include the entire picture. Some food for thought for all of you there, but let's move on to something that I think is a little bit more positive that I'm excited to talk about, which are some small patch notes that have come up in a minor update that released officially for Starfield. Now, this is probably underwhelming for a few folks, and I've seen some of that commentary online. Why aren't some of the major problems fixed? What is Bethesda doing? And we just need to acknowledge that bigger patches, bigger updates do take time, especially for some of the major problems that are coming for Starfield, some of the major bugs you might have experienced. With a game that's as massive as Starfield is, with as much content that Starfield has, it's important to keep in mind something that you fix that might have taken place within the first couple hours of the game might have completely catastrophic effects for an element of the game that's 20, 30, 40, 50 plus hours in later on. So all in all, while the changes that we're seeing here are minor, it's good that Bethesda is active. They're working on things that they can on the side. And of course, this is all in conjunction with elements that we know Bethesda is working on, which are the DLSS support, the widescreen ultra-wide monitor support, the FOV slider, and other elements of that nature. We can have that discussion about whether or not the brightness setting not appearing in the game day one is warranted, but it is coming, it's being worked on, and hopefully we see it within the next patch that gets released. Now, Starfield, as we know, is an absolutely massive game, but there is a question to be said about whether or not that content is substantial enough to keep players in the game and enjoying it actively for the 10 plus years that Bethesda, Todd Howard himself, have actively come out and stated that is the goal for some of their future releases. And I was very wary when we saw some of those promotional images and when we saw some of the early reviews for Starfield coming out with people giving it 10 out of 10s around the board and showering it with the greatest game of the generation and 5 out of 5s and perfect scores. I was a bit wary, and while I do not want to discredit anybody's opinions, if you do think it's your absolute favorite game of all time, that's fantastic. I'm incredibly happy, and I'm glad that you found a game that you resonate with as much as you do with Starfield. That's awesome. However, what I will say is I am curious as to whether or not people are going to start backtracking a bit more and more over time as players have sat with the game for some time, as players have experienced a lot of what Starfield has to offer. And this was evident by a Reddit post that I did come across recently that explains, anyone else feel like Starfield went from there's so much to do and see, I'm overwhelmed, to so that's it, huh? And this post in particular has garnered 2.8 thousand upvotes of people who seemingly are agreeing with it. They go on to say that did a pretty thorough playthrough until New Game Plus, and to be honest, finding it challenging to continue playing. I'm hopeful for future updates and massive mods, but this all takes time. Pretty awesome game, but doesn't have that strong pull like Skyrim or Fallout did for some reason. Hopefully they expand on ship/base building and enrich planets and POIs more. Edit, I still think this game is great, and I didn't mean to make a controversial post. I did compare Starfield to Skyrim and Fallout, which is fair because those are both BGS games, and I completely agree, and generally feel that when compared to those two, Starfield seems to lack a little depth. That's why I also said that I'm hopeful for Starfield in the future. No need to get defensive or upset. The game is still a success. In editing now, and I came back to get a screenshot of this post. Now, what you saw in the video was actually a previous take that I had. I chose not to use where I was able to feature the screenshot in it, so I was able to get it. But since then, I came back to get a screenshot, and not only did I realize it jumped up, this was just a couple hours later, it jumped up to 4.1 thousand upvotes, but additionally, they deleted their post entirely. Now, they did, the original author of the post did allude to the fact that they were getting some hate in the comments that they maybe weren't happy about, but I wanted to just take a moment to say it's not hard to be nice or be a nice person, or just to understand that other folks can make mistakes and they can have different opinions than yours. I'm not saying that is what happened or why they deleted the post, but that is what I'm assuming. And it goes back to sort of with the IGN review. And I know media bias that people are saying aside, because I know that was a factor that people were weighing in, but just IGN had reviewed Starfield a 7. People lost their minds about it, some people, and were saying they can't give it, the game's better than a 7, that's way too low of a score. And I was seeing that all over the place, and it was just one dude's thoughts and opinions on the game. Let him have it. Say, hey, I disagree with some of your points, but you shouldn't say Starfield shouldn't be a 7. That's just, to you, it shouldn't be. And I think there's better ways that we can try to be better at expressing ourselves on the internet, when it's especially hard to pick up context because you don't have things like vocal intonations and stuff like that. So just try to be conscious, whether it's on my videos or other people's videos, in YouTube comments, on Twitter, on Reddit, wherever the case might be. That's my TED Talk for this episode, but do enjoy the rest of the video. This promise of having this massive expansive world where you can go and land on every single planet seems enriching and enthralling at first, but over time it starts to wear thin, which was one of my initial major concerns when the Starfield 1000 planets was initially announced. And it's something that I have felt. I've announced that in my own early impressions of the game video that I did release, and it's something that is really taken away from what a lot of players, what a lot of original Bethesda fans did love about the Elder Scrolls, about Fallout 4 and Skyrim in particular. And there's always that desire. I don't know if this is necessarily the most relevant example I could bring up, but there's always that desire for truly handcrafted feeling content. And you have 87 for Marvel Spider-Man, 94 for God of War Ragnarok, 82 for A Plague Tale Requiem, if we don't want to just focus on the Sony platform titles, and the list goes on. Of course, most of those games relied a bit more on story, but that's also what you got in Skyrim. When you entered into the dungeons, you had, even though it wasn't necessarily always on the nose, but you did have some of those smaller stories that took place, sometimes entire quest lines that you would only find if you explored a particular dungeon. And I think that resonated with a lot of players, Bethesda gamers especially. And it's how Starfield and Elder Scrolls and Fallout and those Bethesda-style RPGs really differentiate themselves from a lot of other open-world games. You don't play through The Witcher and explore caves with the idea that you're going to come out with this massive side quest. Of course, not that these were the most memorable quests of the entire game, but you do get those pangs of nostalgia, and I think a big part of it is the worlds in Bethesda games, Skyrim, Cyrodiil, Boston, DC, have always felt like characters in and of themselves. So to bring this conversation full circle, I do wonder if years from now, when players start to revisit Starfield and say, yeah, I'll download that game and boot it up again and hop into it, if they're going to feel the same as they did about past Bethesda titles. Of course, for some people, 1000% yes, and we have to keep in mind the creation kit isn't out yet for modders to utilize. There's no DLC for the game that has come out yet, so those do add a lot of depth and a lot more to experience within the worlds that we know and love. So some of this conversation might be a bit premature. Now, what I will say is when it comes to the Elder Scrolls 6, and I think this is worthy of an entire video, to be honest, discussing what Elder Scrolls 6 can learn from Starfield, and this could definitely be a part of it. Elder Scrolls has always been rooted in D&D, and of course D&D, dungeons, it's in the name, and I want that to be one of the bigger focuses because a lot of people are seemingly missing it with Starfield. But let me know what your thoughts are about all of this. Do you think that we're going to start to see people walking a little bit back on some of the 10 out of 10s? Because over time, without proper DLC and without full expansions of the game, if this was all that was there, which of course we know isn't the case, but if this was all that was there and all that would ever be there, not including mods, I think we might start to see that more and more over time. But I'm curious what you guys think. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please do leave a like, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.